Don't any of you have the guts to play for blood?
I'm your huckleberry. That's just my game.
Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. We have a legendary show for you today. You don't want to miss. I have a biblical minimalist joining us, which we're going to get into what that means. And I'm also joined by my best friend, Neil from Gnostic Informant, Dr. Niels Peter Lemche. Welcome to MythVision for your first time, my friend. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Before we begin, today on MythVision, we're honored to welcome one of the most distinguished figures in the field of biblical studies and the history of ancient Israel, Dr. Niels Peter Lemche. Dr. Lemche is Professor Emeritus of Theology at the University of Copenhagen, where he served as professor from 1987 to 2013. His academic journey began at the same university, where he earned his Doctor of Theology degree and spent decades shaping the field through both scholarship and mentorship. Over his prolific career, he has published more than 24 monographs, hundreds of scholarly articles, and served as the founding editor of the Scandinavian Journal of the Old Testament, a position he held for over 35 years. He is recognized internationally for pioneering critical approaches to Israelite history, particularly through what has come to be known as the Copenhagen School. His books, such as Early Israel, The Israelites in History and Tradition, Ancient Israel, A New History of Israelite Society, and Biblical Studies and the Failure of History, have challenged traditional assumptions and opened new pathways for understanding the Bible as literature, ideology, and cultural memory. Dr. Lemche has been a visiting professor at leading universities around the world, including the University of Hamburg, Stellenbosch. Is that how you pronounce that? Stellenbosch?
Stellenbosch, yes.
Stellenbosch, Notre Dame, Chicago, Duke, and Tel Aviv, and has lectured at major scholarly conferences across Europe, the U.S., and South Africa. He's also played a foundational role in organizing the European Association of Biblical Studies, serving as its first executive director. In addition to his academic work, Dr. Lemche has contributed extensively to public scholarship through the Danish National Encyclopedia and Gad's Bible Lexicon. He's also a respected voice in broader intellectual circles, contributing essays on theology, archaeology, and Freemasonry, and has translated portions of the Dead Sea Scrolls into Danish. Whether you agree with every conclusion or not, his work demands engagement. He's not just a scholar, he's a paradigm shifter. So today, we're diving deep with a true giant in the field. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Niels Peter Lemche to MythVision. There's my introduction of you, sir. And fair warning to the viewer who might be tuning in, he has a heavy accent. So if we don't understand something, I will try to have him repeat it. And also, if you enjoy this episode, Dr. Lemche, maybe in the future, we can set up a pre-recording where you speak your mother tongue, you speak fluent, and I will use an AI software that will change everything you say in your original language into English with your same accent. We have AI capabilities to make you sound like you sound, but put it in English. Because I think what you're going to say is not only significant, but important for people to listen and understand. So this is the book, Back to Reason. And I have my buddy here, of course, Neil. We have two Nils on the channel, by the way. It's a lucky channel today. Two great giants, Gnostic Informant. Subscribe to Neil if you haven't already. Again, just to tease you, here is Dr. Lemche's CV. This guy has done so much. That's his CV. And, of course, I'm not going to read all of this, but there's so much here that he has contributed since 1971, ladies and gentlemen. I was not born yet. Okay. This is a big deal. Okay. So, Neal, did you want to say something before we begin diving into minimalism?
No, let's dive right into it. Let's do it.
Okay. Get the book. If you don't get the book, I hear that you will spend eternal conscious torment in the afterlife if you don't buy this book by Dr. Lemche. I'm totally kidding. Dr. Lemche, so let's talk about minimalism, because in this book, you go through the history of scholarship. It seems like there's been fistfights, metaphorically, between William G. Dever, who wrote about Asherah and several other archaeological things. I don't know how you might want to start us out here, because there's like this shift between, oh, we just grant all this stuff happened.
Why don't you explain the Albright, how Albright set the tone for what is the norm in academia of looking at the Hebrew Bible versus the Copenhagen School, and what the differences are? I think that would be a good way.
What is minimalism, and what happened in the field?
As you could also say that to Dever and his people, Dever, never mind, but he divides into two groups: maximalist and minimalist. And then Finkelstein, for instance, the archaeologist, he places himself in the middle. And I have told Finkelstein a couple of times that's a very bad place to be, because then you're shooting at you for both sides at the same time. It's much better to stand on one side, then you only have one opponent instead of placing. But Finkelstein, and then try to get in the middle, that's typical. But if you take maximalism, how did it develop? Because if you go back, say, 200 years, you could see in Germany, at German universities, they were not so far away from where we are today. There was a guy called Ilgen who had found this place in the book of Numbers about the Kittim coming on their ships and so on. And he said this must be after Alexander the Great, when the Greeks came to this area. So it means that the text in Numbers must be post Alexander the Great. And we are talking about a guy who lived 200 years ago. It was not uncommon in Germany in those days really to date biblical text very late. What happened was the result of archaeological investigations in the Middle East, especially, of course, in Mesopotamia, where they found texts like the Gilgamesh with its description of the flood. They found those texts and started saying, yeah, it shows that the Bible must be just as old or nearly as old, or at least not very much younger than those texts. Okay, but they started with archaeology. And here you had a problem, really, which also applies to Albright. Somebody thinks that they can get to biblical text without trying to sort out what is what. So we can come back to the source hypothesis in a moment, but somehow people believed that they will be able to distinguish what is primary text and what is secondary text and what is intruders and whatever, all that kind of thing. But the archaeologists believed they could circumvent all of this discussion. Do you get that? I think they could circumvent the discussion and just go directly to the material, because they had the idea archaeological material is just there. It's just to grasp it and then it's to present it.
Right.
And that's nonsense.
So you point that out in the book. You say even the archaeological data, the scholars don't agree how to interpret that data, and oftentimes it doesn't say what they want. They have a spade in one hand and they have a Bible in the other, but mostly they're looking at the Bible and then going, okay, how do we match this with what we're looking at the ground? And sometimes it contradicts. People like Israel Finkelstein, even William G. Dever will recognize stuff doesn't work. But it's almost like if they see something that's close enough, they'll make it work. And not realizing your approach to studying the Bible isn't let's try to see if archaeology matches the Bible, because you can bend stuff to make it match. And we know people fabricate stuff as well. That's a whole nother problem. We might touch on the Tel Dan inscription later. I imagine we will. But this issue, you're saying, look, we're dealing with literary stories, but most scholars that from Albright onward are thinking the patriarchs existed. They believe there are, as a 12 tribe, you call it an amphitryon. What's the proper term?
Amphitryon.
Yeah.
That's a Greek league, you know. So this idea of a league of 12 tribes, what we normally are talking about is the Delphi League, as a league that belonged to the sanctuary at Delphi.
Got it.
It's considered it was 12 phylae in Greek, but there were plenty of those kind of organizations around. There was also one in Asia Minor and whatever.
Egypt too.
But it was quite 12. It's not difficult to understand. I mean, 12 months in a year. I mean, so the division is quite easy to follow. But when I wrote about it the first time, it was back really in '68 in Emmaus thesis. My first book about Israel in the period of Judges is Danish, so excuse of course. But if you take that little book, it's about that hypothesis. And one of the problems for that hypothesis that it should be, so to speak, something that influenced the biblical ideas. It was simply that it's very late. So this system belongs to the Iron Age in Greece, 7th, maybe 8th century BC. And it was definitely not part of something that can be dated back into the second millennium. It didn't exist then. So it's a very bad method to take something that's much younger and want to prove that something should be older because of this. I mean, the logic is not really there, if you can see. But then, of course, archaeology. Yeah, if you have been in excavation, you know, you get something here and say, what is this, you know? And then they start discussing it, fighting each other, whatever. But to think that it's just innocent data you get there, no, it's not. It never is. I have sometimes to tell about my first day at Israel back in the 90s. The first time down in my square was I found some very nice yellow pottery under an iron one floor. It's only that pottery was Crusader pottery. I mean, 2,000 years younger than the floor below which it was found.
That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, how did that happen?
How did that get down there?
The good thing was, as the chief archaeologist said, when I told him about it, also said, yes, but you only found one shirt. It was beautiful. It was not a small one. It was a beautiful one. If you have found 2 or 3, it will be a real problem. Here we can have some animal things. This is a beautiful thing. I take down to play with or whatever, you know. There are all kinds of possibilities here. And later on, I also found some Byzantine glass very close by, which means that the whole area has, so to speak, been disrupted. The strategy has been disrupted by later activity. And that helps a lot. But it still says something about that you get a problem because it doesn't fit you. You think you can just map it, the development aside, some boom, 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 boom. But it's often like this. When Kenya digged in Jerusalem, the problem was there. It was in the 60s. The problem was down on the slope down to the Gihon source. I don't know if you have been in Jerusalem, both of you.
Yes, we both have together actually.
You've been down to the Gihon well, I guess, on the eastern side. Yes, and the archaeology there, the layers were not stratified in any normal way because it was like this. Boom. And they all ended up in the bottom. So when the Babylonians destroyed the city, I said they only had to take out the block below at the lowest level, and then the rest come down like this.
Right.
I mean, archaeology is extremely complicated. It's not become less complicated with all the techniques introduced now. It's fine and good and everything, but definitely you can't be. It's not something you just can go to and say, "Oh, that's how it is."
Got it.
Especially when you have a place that is occupied by people who live on top of people that used to live there, who live on top of people who used to live there before them. The Byzantine period, the Arab period, the Byzantine period, the Roman period, and then the Maccabean period, and the Greek period, and then before that, there's another period, and then you just have all these different areas that are on top of each other. It can be really complicated.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, it's fun. It's what made life fun, of course, but it's complicated.
Yeah.
And you take a biblical text, really, you have, at least the historical works, you can see it's very much the same. It's really like that.
It's a mess. It's a mess. There's all sorts of I love this because you can't just go to your Bible and know what happened. You can't just go to archaeology and know what happened. But you may have a better chance at knowing something, maybe, depending on if it's not disturbed or like
you need archaeology, but you need archaeology though.
Without a doubt.
Because without that hard data, we have nothing.
But
you also need sources. You also need literature. You also need all this stuff is going to help at the end of the day. Obviously, this is not.
But that's true. But what you also need to do you can't go to an ancient text like the biblical ones and start it with only modern ideas in the head. You have somehow to get an idea what was going on in the people up here, in those people who wrote it down. You can of course map what they know. You get a very good impression of what they really knew. Those people, there was quite a lot. I mean, they had extensive knowledge of Mesopotamian tradition, Egyptian tradition, and Greek and other traditions as well. Okay. People are coming in here, I see, and say hello.
Yeah.
Yes, by the way, Dr. Adler popped in just to send you a message.
So I would like to know where, so we have, the Albright school, I guess you'd call it, the maximalists, or even just people who are, taking the Bible, not literally and accepting everything, but kind of going, well, we can't really disprove this part, or like the Josiah reforms sounds like it probably happened. Let's just put that down on the list. Where do you end up? How do you end up with the Copenhagen School? Tell us about how this came about and how you ended up challenging all this stuff.
Yeah, tell us the story. If you can, just give us the story about how to get to minimalism.
Yeah, but then we go back 50 years. I mean, I've been in this business for 60 now.
That's what this book does.
Yes. And 60 years ago, when I finished my basic studies and military training, whatever, I came back to university on a stipend, and I had a project. Really, what would have been a PhD project about kingship in ancient Israel. This sounds like, not too bad. And then I start for serious studies, and just end up saying desperately, nothing fits here. The whole basic idea on which theories have been built, they don't fit together. They don't. I mean, there was an accumulation of data. It was pressed into a theory, but when you moved into it and looked at it, no, it fall apart. All things fall apart. That was one thing for me with this. Then the second thing was, of course, how humans are behaving, because most scholars seems to have very little fantasy, and sociology was really a problem. As all what you call behavioral sciences was really a problem in our field. I sometimes really quoted an Italian, Mario Liverani, I've heard about it, I guess, who wrote some articles about this back in the mid-60s. And what his point was, Orientalists, people in our field, have spent so much time learning different languages, as difficult languages, that have not kept up with development in other fields, like philosophy, whatever. There's simply no literary theory that would embrace what they were doing, in ancient times when they collected the literary work. They didn't have any idea how they perceived history in ancient times, because they transferred our own understanding of history to ancient texts. And therefore they converted those texts to historical documents, which perhaps they were never intended to be, because the aim of writing history in those was very different from the aim of writing history today. Today we want to know what happened. That's not at all interested in what happened in ancient days. They wanted the stories to be, should we say, something ethical stories, something that's shown about human behavior, and something given a good or bad example. If you really want to have an example of this kind of writing, that's called Plutarchus in his parallel lives. Because here you have one bad guy close, and opposite him you have a good guy, and you can compare them. And then he presents a number of those people from Greek and Roman history, and he's not interested if it happened or not happened. He's interested to know, is this a good example for you, or is it a bad example for you? That was really what history was about in those days. Of course, you could write like a person. Herodotus thinks that when he wrote, as I told you before we started, he wrote at a period when the Greek unity was lost. They were already fighting each other. They were already preparing for the Peloponnese War, where everything went a piece like that. It lasted for 20 years perhaps, this unity, not more. So he wanted to present a history that showed what they could do if they were together. But there are no hope for it, of course. But that's really the purpose, to show something there, how it really should be. Because when you write history, it was the same, it's still the same really. When Putin writes history, it's not about what happened. It's not even about what he thinks should have happened. It's about he thinks his people, his nation should know happen. That was his history to his people, so that we understand their history. It's very much.
If I may, just to understand this right, is that the ancients, and your understanding, the ancients are not writing what happened. Whether you want to believe that happened or not, the reader, right? Okay, but that wasn't the intention. The intention was a moral lesson about right and wrong, ethics, code, cultural. You're writing something for your own people. Like today, if I were to write a history, even if I wanted to try and document what happened, I'm still going to give it a slant of who I think is right and wrong in documenting what happened. You're saying they're not really writing what happened. They're kind of writing, and this king did evil all the days of his life. Oh, and this king did good all the days of his life, like you're saying in Plutarch's Moralia, or
There's a quote. There's a quote from a historian. I'm trying to find out who it was, but it goes along the lines of, "History is not written for the dead; it's written for the living. It's for the people. The historian's writing for the people in his time."
Right.
Yeah, and of course, say another way of putting it, very close to it, to say that you write history about the past for the present.
For the present, right?
With the future in mind.
Yeah.
Right. And so do you think, I know this is jumping the gun, because I kind of want to get the story of what happened, what scholars believed Abraham, Moses, all of those characters seem to have existed. Then they started to question if these characters are made up. Then the judges, then the Davidic dynasty, the united monarchy, and the 12 tribes with Solomon. And I kind of want to paint that story as we lead into what you think and where you're at today as a minimalist.
Yeah, so first of all, if you take the patriarchs, Abraham and so on, I think Witthausen put it very fine when he said, you can't write the history of a nation before you have a nation. So the patriarchal stories demands that there must be somebody to tell the story about the early past. It's not really a problem, but you have really to see the stories in context, not with the context they're talking about, but in the context when they're written. It's always that must be the first priority when you're starting a text. As I said, I have no idea. I think I have an early date for the establishment of this text. I also have a pretty late as a terminus ad quem as well. The early date for those texts is at a fixed date. It's really the death of Heroes. No, so the death of Amalek, I told you about it. The death of Amalek in 272 BC. He was killed by a woman who threw a big stone down on his head, and then somebody next to him cut his head off. It was a street. It was street fighting there, and that's a blend together. But that's a pure story. And Amalek, you have him fighting on the street in Tethys, and a woman throws down a tile on him, and he asks his servant to kill him, so he was not killed by a woman. But you have this fixed idea: a woman killed the great hero. And that's only one example. It's not enough, because unus testis, nullius testis, as the Romans say. It's not enough. You need to have more. So you move to the next text. That's a sacrifice of Jephthah's daughter, that he could get off to Troy.
You're talking about the Book of Judges for people who don't know.
Yeah, I'm talking about chapter 9 and chapter 11 and chapter and so on in Judges.
Got it.
And so you don't yet get the name of Jephthah's daughter. We know her name was Ephagenia from the Greek tradition. And there are not a number of other, should say, things in that story, and the development of that story in Greece also have some likeness to what you find in the Bible. Because in one tradition, she's killed. In another tradition, she's saved by the goddess, and a stag is put in her place and sacrificed in her place. I think we know that story from another place.
Abraham.
Yeah, Abraham, Isaac, and Isaac. Yes. So that's.
Oh, you're muted, Neil.
I say, but it's different because one's a deer and one's a ram. Not the same.
Yeah.
No, I've heard that argument before, though. People say it's different. One of them's a deer. One of them's.
Yes, but you see, you can follow it. You can follow.
I know, because Artemis's deer is sacred to her. She, in a lot of her statues and sculptures, she has a deer next to her. That's her. That's a sacred animal to Artemis. Whereas in the other case, the ram, for whatever reason, is more more reasonable for that story.
With that culture.
That's because I said before that scholars have no fantasy. They think a story, when you a story should be the same, and when you mean the same, it should be the same here. No, it's a plot that is the same. Authors are always elaborating on a theme, and therefore it's not demand. But interesting thing is, Agamemnon is sailing off, whereas Jephthah wanted coming home. Here we have a difference. But then you go to the Greek Gnostic traditions. Gnostic, that means the stories about the heroes from Troy going home, because Odysseus is not the only one who has trouble coming home. Agamemnon is murdered as soon as he comes home by his wife.
Right.
The king of Crete, Idomeneus, he goes home, but again he can't get home. So he promises to sacrifice the first living being from his house he meets when he arrives, and that is his son. We never get the name of the son, but I can see the writer in Judges finding out, it makes more, it gives a better expression to kill a girl than kill a boy. A little girl, okay, you see already what happened. It's really Gaza today in some way. Girls children are always, of course, victims, and girls are even better than boys in this case. Boys can grow up to become bad guys, you know. But so it's really the Idomenea story, but it's with a girl, like in his story about Agamemnon and Ephagenia. I say Ephagenia because I speak Greek, you hear. And then Judges. Then you have Samson. Samson opens up by taking the line like that. He has a colleague, Hercules. He opens up his career taking a line like that. And you have the same story. And the bane of both people, both heroes are women. So that's the third part of it. And to be sure about Judges, last story about Judges about the girls in Shiloh who are raped or taken away. Well, that's a story of Sabinian women again, as you have in Livius, you know, from early story of Rome. There are no men left there, there are no women left there. So I had to kidnap the girls from Sabina and bring them to Rome in order to establish a society. It's the same story, really.
I never really thought about that connection, and I imagine there's so many of these that you're highlighting.
Yeah.
But so go ahead.
Someone might ask, well, how do you know they're not the borrowing's not going from the other way around? How do you know the Greeks aren't borrowing from the Hebrews? And I would say to that, well, show us knowledge of the Hebrews in any Greek sources anywhere before like 300. And I mean, what do you think about that?
I think the interesting thing is if you go to Greece and look at mythology, yes, you can see that it exists quite a long time before we have it in writing. For you could go to Greek art, especially pottery, and see the images there, and then you find enormous lot of material really to date those. It goes much longer back. It's not something late. Homer, of course, the themes and what you have there goes back to the beginning, to the first part of the first millennium, not the second part. So we can see it. But if you go to Israel, Palestine, whatever, you find nothing. It's totally silent. There's nothing there.
Derek, can you let me share my screen real quick?
Yeah.
As you can see, like there's an entire Wikipedia page just for the sacrifice of Iphigenia by itself. Like that's how common she was on vases and artwork. Yep. Going back, you know, as far as back as like this right here looks like a pretty old. I don't even know. I'm just looking at this fresh. It says here 310 BCE, 330. That's Iphigenia being sacrificed on a crater. So we're in the 4th century BCE. We know that's there. You know what I mean? So I'm just pointing out, like, yeah, as you pointed out, the archaeology, the art, the stuff like that kind of tells us that these stories are there. Whereas, and when we look at Judea, we have the Bible, and the Bible says all these things are happening. They talk about these kings. They talk about Hezekiah and Josiah and all the prophets. But then when we look in the archaeology, we don't find them anywhere, not on artworks. Then they're not naming their children based off these people. It's just a big black hole where the Bible says one thing and then archaeology says something completely different.
Yeah. That's probably a very important part of minimalism, to realize that. The only point about minimalism is really that we don't go for the historical background, the historical truth. We don't go for that, really. We really want to understand those texts as texts. And I was just sitting there and speculating a little about the theological part of it. After all, I'm also a theologian. What's the important thing really about the biblical text is that something happened 2,000 years ago or 3,000 years ago. Is that important today? No, the important thing is the discussion about what may have happened and the discussion about the text we have, what is it telling us. That's really, but what happened, let the dead bury the death and the dead, you know. I mean, it's really, it's the same. My favorite example have for many years been the Battle of Waterloo. Battle of Waterloo was fought one day in 18th of June 1815 between 1 o'clock in the afternoon and about 7 o'clock in the evening, early evening. That was a battle, 6 hours. And they were over. And from a military point of view, the only surprising thing was Napoleon lost the battle. It seems to be impossible to lose a battle if you're playing Napoleon at war games. But he lost it. Good. That's something we can discuss. And they've been discussing, among scholars, they've been discussing this battle from that perspective for 200 years now. But the battle itself is not so important today. We can see, yes, it is important, but for otherwise, but it's not the theme today. But again, it's not the battle as such, it's not the event as such that's important. You had the same in the New Testament. If you are really, you say, did Jesus hang on was died on Golgotha? Yes, I think I had no problems with that. That's okay. Yes, it was quite normal in Roman, right? The Roman Empire to end your life in that way if you were opposed to the Romans, of course. But again, it's not really we don't really know anything except what has been handed down to us in the gospel about this event. Then we have, of course, this caricature of the cock from 100 years later. But so there's no doubt about that. From the very early beginning, had this idea. Does it say that it was Christ, Messiah, was hanging up there? We don't know, but somebody saw it that way. And that's you have to go. As I mean, when we have those ancient texts, we have to go into the mind of the people who are writing and reading those texts, because it's a double side. You write a text in the hope that somebody will read it. You don't write a text to be put away immediately and thrown away.
Right.
So there must be some kind of congruence between the writer and the person who reads the text. So those who wrote, for instance, the Pentateuch and Jewish history must have an idea about what they're doing. There must be a reason for writing this, connecting this thing. We can always discuss where it happened, whether it's Mesopotamia and Egypt, in Alexandria, as advocated lately. By the way, Alexandria is a very good place really to look for, because the Jewish quarter in Alexandria was only about half a mile from the museum and the library. So
just for viewers, he's saying Alexandrian Library is a good place to at least look for the crafting of the biblical text that we see. And half a mile from the Alexandrian Library was a massive Jewish quarter at this time. So they're right there. They're scholars. They know what they're talking about.
Yes, exactly. So you have really an environment, a possible environment for it there. We have been discussing, we said before, Judah, as a deer, and no, there's nothing really. I know Lipschitz want to have it Persian, but that's an old thing. Philip Davis wanted the same, to talk about the Persian period. But what do we have from the Persian period really? Nothing. And Jonathan Adler has very clearly shown that nothing there. There's not one piece of evidence that anything really was going on there. Yes, the name of the deity is okay. We have no problem with that. We have no problem with that.
Yahwism exists. We know we're not doubting that.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Right.
But we also know that must a long time before, also from inscriptions and for the names and so on, from they're 500 years older. It's not a problem really. You don't need to make it a problem. But then, of course, you have the text when you talk about the two texts from the south, talking about Yahweh's wife, Asherah as the wife of Yahweh, Yahweh and his Asherah. I know that some who go to the grammar there and say there's something about personal names, but as a Asherah, and that here we actually have a very interesting note in the story about Uzziah's reform, when he cleaning the temple and thrown out Asherah the temple with her belongings and her party or whatever, out. At a conference many years ago in Bern, Albert de Pury, who died a few weeks ago, a Swiss scholar, he was also a fabulous cartoonist. He presented us at this conference at the Academy in Bern for a cartoon of Yahweh and Asherah after the exile. And you see Asherah is a big lady with a huge fur, really mink, wow. And then beside him, a little angry rabbi, a kind of Khamenei type. You look up at her and say, and now Yahweh to Asherah after the exile, and now get lost. You see, there are a lot of things we can no, really what minimalism is about is to find out how this literature came into being without assuming some external macro theories.
Starting from the known and going to the unknown, rather than starting from the Bible as your start place and then seeing which way can we go. You're saying we got to start from the known. Where do we know? Okay, we know the Maccabean period was enforcing Torah. Start right there. Let's go back from there.
Yep.
And then let's move back. Okay, 2nd century BC. Okay, we got something. 3rd century BC. Oh, it's starting to get a little quiet now. 4th century BC. Gone. And that's to me is like that. I don't know why this is people are so hesitant to see what people are saying when we bring this up?
For just a pinpoint it, we didn't finish Ahimelech before, because I said we have here Terminus Aquo.
We have who?
A Terminus Aquo. What is in English? A term up Aquo, as is Latin for you, the starting date.
Okay. Yep.
Oh,
yep.
yeah.
Terminus antiquem, terminus antiquo.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Good. That's 300. No, that's 272. The death year of Pyrrhus. Ahimelech Pyrrhus. That's okay. Good. Then maybe also you have a Terminus Adquem or before. This is the poet or the tradition living in Alexandria called Ezekiel. Their own fragments of his tragedy on Exodus has survived. Flemming Nielsen, I talked about to you before we started this program. Flemming Nielsen, he wrote a dissertation about it. For some silly reason was never published. I don't know why, really. Because now he, of course, he made a joke on me, because I always said that the only Semitic language I never read learned was Ethiopian.
Was what?
Ethiopian.
Okay.
That's the only Semitic language I never touched. And so Flemming in his dissertation had a lot of quotes in Ethiopian. Just to
oh my gosh. So he's, by the way, in your book, for those who don't know, and I don't want to derail you, Niels, if you don't mind me calling you Niels, he has studied quite a bit of languages. So a lot of the accusations from his opponents, like William Dever and others that are in the field, in the school, that are posing minimalism, it's propaganda, so to speak, to say that you guys don't know what you're talking about or haven't studied and learned Near Eastern, these languages, all this ancient archaeology and stuff. You have been looking into it, and you do know these languages. So that's the only language you haven't touched, you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but then you say Ezekiel, this tragedian, he lived around 200 BC. So here you have...
about Ezekiel the tragedian, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You can find the fragments, I think, in what his name, his Vandekam, where he wrote his 2 big volumes there.
Right here.
Yeah, okay.
Ezekiel the tragedian's in here.
Yeah, got. Now, it's not, it should not be there. It should be... Wait a minute.
It's in here. You're talking about this, the other volume? Is that what you're saying?
I'm talking about this one. No, it's all. Yeah, it is the same. Yes, you're right. It's
it's just a different cover. That's all.
Yeah. Okay.
James Charles Wood pseudepigraph. Yeah,
it should be there. Yeah. Because, and when I read the fragments of Ezekiel, I could simply find almost quotations from the book of Exodus. It means that if you use this as guidelines, the period should be between 272 and circa 200 BC. You see, then we have almost 200 years to play with. I mean, when I look at what I'm writing and putting the pages together, I could have written that in a very short time after all, alone. We don't need to have hundreds of years to this development. You only have to have somebody who puts and start the project. And then it may take only a few weeks, months, maybe a year or 2 or 3 for the main part. Then you have other books like, for instance, Song of Songs or other things. I mean, it's not that, but
which
the main
books?
Story, the Song of Songs.
Okay, got it.
So such books have their own history. But if you take a historical history, it doesn't need to take a very long time to write a story like you find in the Old Testament. It's a few hundred pages after all. It's not thousands of pages.
I mean, look at how much Virgil wrote in one lifetime. Look how much Plutarch wrote. This whole half a library could be all Plutarch in one lifetime. You can write 10. Someone can write 3 times the amount of the entire Bible in one lifetime. Plutarch did it. Diodorus of Sicily has done it. Virgil has done it. There's plenty of people I can point to that wrote more than the Bible in their one lifetime.
You're right, and as I would say, I published about somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 pages. probably closer to 10,000 than to 5,000. Eh?
Right.
I can't really see the problem.
No.
I'm not talking about the stupid people who are writing those things. I think there's quite gifted writers, many of them.
Right.
So it's not a physical problem in any way. It's not an intellectual problem in any way. And then people come in with an argument, often meet in Germany, that but the time, it doesn't fit with the time. And I just say, how much do we really know about what happened down there on the street in that period? Do you know what happened in the schools down there? You know what happened on the high level, perhaps. But
you're talking about Alexandria, Egypt. You're talking about 3rd century, 4th century BCE.
Yeah, but it could be. It's a development period. It's intellectual, very lively period, and they had simply the literature for all over the Greek Empire collected in Alexandria.
And they had the Helopoulos Library even before that. I was reading about how a lot of the Helopoulos Library was the central library during the Persian period. And then when the Greeks took over, they moved all that to Alexandria. So we're talking like lots of old texts, a lot of it Aramaic too, because the Persians wrote in Imperial Aramaic and they were controlling Egypt. People don't remember, people don't realize this. Egypt was controlled by Persia before the Greeks, not Egyptians. So there's a lot of Aramaic writings in there, a lot of Babylonian, Assyrian writings in there that the Greeks are taking over.
Yeah.
And this is a debate amongst minimalists right now. In your book, you talk about you take a later date, but I think Philip R. Davies, or I can't remember who the other academic was, Thomas L. Thompson, maybe.
No, not Tom.
Who thought that it's either late Persian or a Hellenistic. And there's this debate between minimalists about exactly when.
That's what I was saying too.
Yeah, when was the Bible's the overall text of the biblical corpus?
I think it's a fair. I think it's a fair hypothesis to say they probably have text from that Persian period, and then it continues to go into the Hellenistic period, and then it gets finalized and completed up until 2nd century BC. It's taking time. Yeah,
I mean, you can also have much older texts there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I mean, I found out it's a text. It was a lecture I gave some 10 to 2 years ago or more in Copenhagen. It has been published. This where I opened up the quoting 2 lines from the Baal epos from Ugarit, and then the 2 lines from Isaiah 27. They are the same. They're exactly the 2 same lines
from the Ugaritic, which is 1400 BCE. I mean, you're talking a very old text, but you're saying that they would have had knowledge down here. The scholars, the elites, would have been aware of knowing how to translate.
I say we can't just dismiss the idea that those people knew such things. I mean, they got that. They had some things like that. I mean, there are 2 words different in those 2 texts, but definitely same. There are 2 habaslegomena there in the Hebrew text. The 2.
Also, you have the Greeks.
Wait a minute.
Sure.
The same 2 words are also popping up in Isaiah, and are also habaslegomena in the Bible.
Really?
Yeah, there are no doubts. There are no doubts. There are 2 words that are different, but because a snake is called something different in the Ugaritic from what is called in Hebrew and so on. It's not that, but otherwise it's absolutely the same text. When you continue on, it's not the same text anymore. But see here a kind of quote or kind of line or whatever you have, which belongs to what people would have known. So we can't control. Sometimes people think they can control what the ancient knew and did.
Right.
It's a huge mistake. Of course, we cannot. We can never control anything. We have just to follow and say, oh, it seems that this seems interesting. How can that be? And another thing is my favorite text here. That is really a story about Sennacherib's attack on Jerusalem. When you read the short text, the beginning of it, it's as if he's taking out his annals. It's much shorter than if you take the normal text as published by, for instance, Lugenbill, but it's still, you can see it's the same text. There are no doubt about that. Somehow the Bible, the people, the person who sat down and wrote those lines, those 4 or 5 verses in 2 Kings, he had some knowledge from some archive who either quoted or was identical with what you found in a Babylonian, Assyrian archive. But how could that be? But that's not so. As you said to yourself, the Persians connected this, because one of the things you did when you conquered another country in ancient times, at least in the Babylonian culture, is you confiscated the library,
right,
and brought it home. There's a wonderful example told by archaeologists from Hama. When they digged out the palace, they found the library, but there were no books, no tablets left there. But you could see that the Assyrians had brought the tablets out and loaded them somewhere outside, because we found some broken tablets on the way from the library to the gate. So on the way you've been there, you're wrong with all those tablets, you know. So there's no doubt they simply confiscated them and brought them, because, as I told you before, that culture is about law. And since you have conquered a foreign countries, you must have an excuse to conquer it. There must be a reason. But God will not accept you just do it for your own purpose. You had to do somewhere else. So you had to show, you had to demonstrate to your God, bring it home, show it to your God. You can see here, I'm told it's all right. I did only what I should do, and it's only for your sake. I mean, such a thing were ruling, and therefore you can find those. And that it means that when we look at the persons who wrote those historical texts, of course they knew something from, what would you call it? I probably call it Israel, because it was not Israel. It's also a bad thing to call it Palestine. It's impossible. The Holy Land, perhaps. The Holy Land. Never mind. I hate that word. Never mind. But
Herodotus called it Palestine. Herodotus calls it Palestine.
That is right. It's even called the Syrian Palestine.
Yeah.
When I had to teach, and I told, as I said before we started, I started places, the Dead Sea in Palestine. He's quite salty after all, isn't he? So it's not, but yeah, let's not use it. It's ancient. So the important thing is here that the person who wrote this must have access to information. When we look about what we find, as we said before, Judea, even up in Samaria, how much evidence is there really that they access to such sources? Some things they had, and I just ordered a book about, that's been published, a book about Akkadian inscriptions, cuneiform inscriptions from Palestine, from the first part of the, so from around 1000 and onwards. That's open to be possible to write a whole book about it today. So I had to, but that's to take into consideration. But again, so they must have access to it, and we can't preclude. We just should not preclude that there was no information left from this past. Of course there was. It doesn't matter, because as the example I gave you from Sennacherib in 2 Kings, he used those. The author used those 4 or 5 verses with the introduction to it, and then he started with a story that's totally out of place in connection if you compare it to what Sennacherib has to say about his campaign,
right?
About the liberation of Jerusalem, all this, you know. It's what they call invented. It's just how they wrote history. They have a few lines, and then they continue those few lines and develop into a nice story in their own eyes and for their own purpose. It's not a problem. You're saying you have with Nebuchadnezzar and his conquest of Jerusalem. As we know from the Weizmann Chronicle, the Babylonian Chronicle, and we have information about Nebuchadnezzar's first attack on Jerusalem in 597, 96, but we have nothing about the second one. But the first one is okay. The story we have here about him coming to Jerusalem and putting Zedekiah in as his vassal king is okay. We have Babylonian sources. And therefore, sometimes I've said, if you really want to say something in the Bible is historically correct, we need to have external evidence.
Yeah. That's a big problem. The external is the problem. And that's why it's difficult to pin this stuff down. Neil, you were going to say something, though.
There was something I wanted to add to what you were saying. We also have evidence that the Greeks knew how to read and write in cuneiform. So whatever languages, I'm not sure if they actually knew how to read Akkadian as one of their languages, but I know there's text from the 3rd century BCE in cuneiform that says the King Alexander has died today. Talking about Alexander the Great. So that knowledge was, they were able to read and write whatever sources were available in that time period.
How could they not? I mean, just looking at the myths, right now I'm crafting, and you were talking about Bel Marduk. Before that, you have Tammuz. Before that, you have Dumuzid. And Adonis is no doubt literally the continuation of the dying and rising god in this particular motif. And I'm thinking,
in fact, when Sappho first writes about Adonis, the first Greek source that mentions Adonis is Sappho, late 7th century BC, maybe early 6th, and she describes his death almost exactly as how the weeping of Ishtar for Dumuzi is.
Yeah,
Aphrodite's beating her breasts and ripping out her hair over beautiful Adonis, and so that you get that scene, and that's the scene that you get with Ishtar ripping out her hair, beating up her breasts, weeping over her beautiful Dumuzi. You can tell they knew this story.
So how did they know this story if it wasn't somehow linguistically?
Yeah,
they know how to speak these stories somehow. So that we have this anachronistic. We imagine we know that they're all like divided and as if they weren't multilingual. Like today, half the people that live near me who are just native-born Americans know some Spanish, right? Like we live in an area where mostly it's Hispanic and people who are Americans that speak English, and like there's so much cross-linguistic stuff. In the ancient world, it was even probably more so. You have to buy food from the people who speak the other language, and it's probably more difficult if you didn't find a way to have those. I just imagine we'd have to know what the ancient world would look like, and we have this idea that you have to have the same language. So a lot of scholars who get pushback to me and Neil who think that maybe Greek influences inspired the stories of the Bible, they are, and I get the reason, it's a good caution. They say, where are the loan words? Where are all the Greek loan words if the Jews are borrowing?
Except the only problem with that is when we know that Virgil is reworking Homer in the Aeneid, but you don't find Greek loan words in the Aeneid. You find it's Latin. It's using native Latin to retell the story. So that argument that we should have to find loan words, it falls apart when you look at other texts that we know are borrowing from each other, and they don't have those particular loan words coming through, unless it's from like the nouns of the Greek gods or something. But even they translate Zeus into Jupiter. So like, or Hermes into Mercury. So even in that level, you don't find loan words. They translate, they rework, they retell. That's what they do.
That's true, but and that's typical also of text of the character of the Aeneid as a Virgil's text there. I was part of a project that translated the official Danish Church Bible that came out in '92, and we are not allowed to use foreign words at all. All foreign words were banished. It should be only the classical Danish words.
Wow.
And it was quite a job because they also taught you don't need all those foreign words. On the other hand, last time in America, I walked around in the center of Boston. We're back now in 2008. In the center of Boston, I listened to the people on the street. And the language I heard the most in the center of Boston was Spanish.
Yep.
That was not what I expected, of course, but it was. I mean, if you get to Europe nowadays, I mean, we large parts of Paris where you don't talk, where you have to listen to Arabic. And if you don't understand Arabic, you're lost there, I suppose, because the local will be speaking Arabic. Then sometimes we can listen to how you need to go to the young people, at least to what language they're playing in, to understand what's going to happen. And Malula in Syria, I went down for the monastery. I've been there so many times, so at that time I went down to listen to the children. Because I said in Malula they're speaking Aramaic as a Syriac, ancient Syriac, whatever, not Arabic. So I went down and listened to the children. They spoke Arabic together. But when a tourist, of course, they They took, they returned to Syria, of course, just to impress the tourists. Here, Jesus' own language and the audience, you know. So that's part of it. And there's also something you have to think about when we read the Bible. Also, we don't have very many loan words in the Bible. We have some. For instance, ketonet, the dress they get Adam and Eva when they send out. They send out in ketonet.
What? Hold on, I didn't hear it. What'd you say?
Ketonet in Hebrew.
Okay.
I said keton in Greek, with the dress. So it could be the same. The word of paradise is from Iran. It's Persian.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, you could go on that way again. And of course, the Akkadian loanwords as well. The Egyptian loanwords. It's not a problem really, because it was not banished, but an author of the character of Virgil and also the other author around him. I don't think you find any foreign words in Horace, for instance, or in Catullus. I don't think they use them at all. It's really classical Latin. So, whereas if you go back to Plautus, some from the previous century,
Plautus, the comedies you're saying, the comedies.
Yes. Yeah. Then you find a much more unruly language. You also find it in Horace. In some
vulgar Latin, I think they call it, right? Vulgar Latin.
Yeah, it could be vulgar Latin, but it's even more funny. First time I read some of the speeches or discussions, or whatever you call it, dialogues in Horace. I said, it sounds like Italian to me. No cases. They use prepositions instead of cases, like in Italian.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but you had the series, it only went on from a year, I think, really, where they found out that who made the series. So when the Romans were together, they spoke their own language, you know. When they had spoke officially, they spoke classical Latin. And when you listen to people around them, they spoke some kind of pidgin Latin. There were a number of different levels, and therefore also understanding between the three groups and different groups was probably not the best always. But again, do you know what I always have said to my students? If you really want to understand something about the society down there in those days, then you go to the cinema and see Life of Brian.
Life of Brian?
Yes.
That's the best. That's the best. Okay, let me ask you this. Because it's too much to try and go into all the details that push and show why minimalism. I'd like to talk about Teldan, and I'd also like to ask you, why do you, if we take the minimalist approach, which is trying to understand the text, not trying to say what happened, what didn't happen, mostly focus on why they wrote this. We need to answer this question. Why did they write this text? What was their intention at the time that they crafted these stories, using older material, using other people's sources to help them be creative with their own material? But then also, how did the 12 tribes, what happened with the United Monarchy, the holes in this, and how we ended up doubting that David, ever ruled a kingdom? Even the Albright school, even William Dever and these scholars say, hey, he was at least a chieftain. David was just a basic chieftain of a small couple villages in the middle of the desert. Well, that's a far cry from the description we get from the Bible, which tells us he is a massive king ruling a kingdom, and Solomon with all of his riches and glory and 1,000 wives and all of this stuff. And it's like, so what the scholars tend to do, and you say this really well in this book, you say, there's scholars that want to go, I'm not a minimalist and I'm not a maximalist. I'm not extreme one way or the other. I'm going to be the middle ground. But you catch them all the time in this book. You document saying how often they're quick to lean into, well, Moses could have actually existed. The Exodus could have kind of happened. And it's kind of like, whoa, dude. Like, I thought you said you thought Moses was invented in the 8th, 9th century, 7th century BCE. but now you're granting he could have existed in the 13th, 14th, 15th century, and they could have actually had an Exodus. You're really giving all sorts of credibility to maximalism. So in a sense, you're sympathetic to the conservative evangelical more than you realize, and not recognizing more reasons to lean into a more critical view, such as minimalism. Anyway, there's so much I want to ask you, but
yeah. But Tadanka we can get back to. But if you take, there was a saying by Kenneth Kitchen, who is from Liverpool School, if you would talk about that. Everything is as written, He says, lack of evidence is not evidence of lack. And that has been accepted by far too many people. But because I say it's exactly what it is. Lack of evidence is evidence of lack. The not is a foreign element. It is, you have AB plus BA, you take it. Lack of evidence, evidence of lack. It goes fine together, but then put in a not. Absolute evidence is not evidence of lack. And it means there should be a little hole where you can escape out. But just say, this is a false logic. There's no hole you can escape from. There's no way you can get away from this problem. There's no way. And you can also say, in one case, yes, it might have happened. But the third time you say it, or the fifth time, or the 10th time you say it, it might have happened. It's too much that might have happened. It makes no sense. You can't use it.
You're muted now.
I mean, you can't use it for anything. That's the reason when I talked about that nothing fits. Yes, it can all happen, but nothing fits really. And the more you get into it, the less is really fitting. I said, your problems get only greater as you move into it with historical study. If you use, but also one of my maxims, when you're critical, you can't be 90% critical. You can't be 70% critical. You can only be 100% critical. That's the demand. You can't simply graduate the sense of being critical. That's 100% you're critical. You can't say in advance there's nothing happened. It's not that. But you also go in to say, what do we know? What do we have? What kind of evidence do we have? Sources, whatever, and put it together. That's the only thing. And if you come with an idea, this is history. And now we have to find out how it can be history, in spite of all this lack of evidence.
Right.
then you're lost.
Isn't that what they're... Oh, sorry, Neil.
I was just going to say, no, go ahead. I forgot what I was going to say now.
I was going to say the chieftain argument, that he was just a chieftain in the territory. And I don't know the history. You've been around for a minute and you know more of the history here. So let's just bring up the can of worms, the Tel Dan inscription. Yeah. I don't remember if it's line 6 or 7, but on the line 6 or 7, I think it is, on the Tel Dan inscription, you get the house of David mentioned.
Yeah. Real quick, before you say that, I just want to, I remember what I was going to say. So one of the things that I noticed about this exact same problem that I'm noticing is the methodology goes out the window, because if we're really working from the known to the unknown, but all of a sudden you're leaving the door open for possibility, we just haven't discovered it yet. We have to keep looking. We can't rule it out. You shouldn't rule it out. You shouldn't throw it all away. That, to me, it's no different than when you hear someone like Graham Hancock, no offense if you're a Graham Hancock fan, saying that there's a lost civilization from Atlantis and you can't disprove it. We haven't found it yet, but you can't disprove it. It's no different than that. It really, why is the Bible any different than Atlantis at this point? If we haven't found it, why are we saying don't rule it out yet? We might find it later.
I would rather be wrong. Sorry to take us off. I want to get back to Tel Dan, but I would rather say I'm doubting it until we actually have good data that goes, you know what? I was wrong. I'm happy to say that I thought it may not be the case, but I'll be persuaded.
Exactly. With the data we have right now, here's where we're at. We haven't found anything yet. So far, as of right now, it looks like this is mythology. Boom. And then when we find something, we change our answer based on what we find. It's that simple.
Yep.
Here, my normal example is the moon. Münchhausen when he came to the Mune, he discovered it was really a green cheese.
Right.
Yes. But of course, it was never there. Of course. And to say anything about the consistency of the moon like that would be an assertion. It's not an argument at all. It cannot be used in a discussion as an argument. It's something some people just say. But after Armstrong came there and visited the place, we know for definitely it's not a green cheese.
Right.
And that becomes an argument, changes the status into an argument. Now we can discuss what the moon really is. Before, I say 100 years or 200 years ago, it was impossible. You had all kinds of ideas, but you had nothing to have them in. So that's it. With David,
King David.
When you're talking about King David and the problem with King David is really, you can't have both. You can't have a historical David and the biblical David. You have to make a choice. And that's very much the choice you have to make a number of times when you're reading the Bible. You will have simply to say, what do I want? The story or the history of something that happened, as I said before, 3,000 years ago or more. But you could also have something that might relate to the present situation. A good example of that would be Cain and Abel. I'll come back to the inscription in a moment. If you take Cain and Abel, I think it's one of the most important texts we have in the Bible, if not the most important. Because they come out of paradise, and the first thing that happens is their brother kills brother.
The what?
That Cain kills Abel, his brother. That's the first thing that happens when humanity is outside of paradise. Then the scene is set. Then we know what is going on. And nothing in the Bible really tells us a different story from that. Everything is set there. This is the worst crime you find, a crime within the family. Because in the system they had, there was no assimilation possible. You couldn't really pay you out of this. You couldn't really make a deal. Because the family that committed the crime is the same family that suffered from the crime. It's simply into the law system they had, the worst thing that could happen. But it also tells, because since Cain died, we are all children of Cain. We are all going back to Cain. We are not going back to Abel. There were no there, so that was close. So you always would say Cain who decided, and Cain created civilization. It's very clear from the come on the music, cities, and whatever. So the descendants of Cain are the creators of civilization. It's also something. All these are so extremely important. Should we discuss whether it was historical? Why should we waste time on that?
Yeah. So for those who don't know what he just said, in case, because I know that your accent is heavy, Cain and Abel, first brotherly. Cain kills Abel. We're all descendants according to the biblical genealogy of Cain, where civilization and everything comes from. Should we start talking about the historical reality about Cain and Abel? Well, evangelicals, I'm sure, often do, but this is myth. This is mythology. And so...
Well, that brings us back to David, though. Someone might say, yeah, I agree with you on Cain, duh. But David, we have an inscription that mentions the house of David.
Right.
This is more likely to history based on the evidence. What would you say to that?
Oh, I sometimes I've just used Keith Whitelam's. You know him? Keith Whitelam.
Keith Whitelam is he also minimalist? Yeah,
really, he is. He is really. You can say
he's
so.
Late Persian, right? Late Persian.
Yeah, but he was colleague to Philip Davis, in Sheffield.
Yep.
But he says, well, England is ruled by a house of Windsor.
And the Heraclidae ruled the Lydian kingdom before the Lydians. And does that mean they're sons of Heracles? That's what the word means, sons of Heracles.
Yes, exactly. Heraclides.
That's why I doubt. I think House of David sounds more like an honorific title based on the myth, a legend. But yeah,
you have the problem about the name itself, which is a bit strange after all. The form itself is Aramaic. It's an American participium, Also, we take to write in Hebrew, writing, kotev in Hebrew. Det er kativ in Aramaic, the same form. David with long A first and then the I is really an Aramaic participium form, participe form. And therefore we can discuss. We don't have any other example of that name except in biblical context.
Right.
It's totally unknown. But we have the root. It was Gösta Alström from Chicago who wrote about it more than 50 years ago, and talking about it could be a surname for God. D in Hebrew, dot, the loved one.
Beloved, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what it means in Aramaic, you're saying?
Yeah, but also in Hebrew. DVD in Hebrew also has this meaning.
So beloved house, it would say Ben Dawud would be beloved house.
Yeah, or the house of the beloved one. It could be the house of God.
Yeah.
And it could point back to a kind of divine origin of this house.
Is this similar to like how, sorry to interrupt, but like Daniel, in the book of Daniel, scholars have noticed that there's an Ugaritic deity figure named Daniel. He's like a divine kind of human man who kind of like the myth of Kurta.
Yeah, but that's just a name, though. He's just named after him.
Well, that's what I'm saying, though. Like
it's true, but just to put away the misunderstanding, he's not divine. He's a king of Ugarit, a mythic king of Ugarit, Daniel. We don't have the I, right. Daniel,
yeah.
And he also suffers. He goes through. There's a whole epos about him. Not much is left of it, but again, there was a whole epos about Daniel.
Right.
So it's a kind of mythical figure, but you also have other figures like that in the Bible who will find in another context outside the Bible. Job, for instance.
Job?
Yeah, you have more or less a part of this plot in the Ahikar text.
Ahikar, yeah.
Yeah, so it should not be, it's not so bad after all. It's okay. Daniel, Dan is law again. Din, Dan, or El, God, God's law, God's lawman.
God's judge, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's Daniel. That my judge is God.
Yeah.
You should take that.
So,
I just wondered if
to go back to David, though.
David, yeah.
So David, you're saying you think it's more likely that this, if it's because it's written in Aramaic, it could be like an honorific title of a house being a beloved house.
Yeah.
And then what do you think about my interpretation that it is based off a character named David, but we don't know if he's legendary or not. It could be like Heracles. The Heraclidai are named after Heracles. That doesn't mean Heracles really was their first king. It just means they're named after a legend. But in that particular case, I would be then admitting that there was some sort of David legend floating around in the 9th century. So then you kind of got to go, which one is the most likely here?
No, but a key idea when they talk about the House of Windsor is, can you find this Windsor anywhere? And then it was a name that was attached to the royal family in England during the First World War, because the royal family is German in England. It's Battenberg in German. And then they changed it because of circumstances into Mountbatten, which is a name you know probably, a royal name from England. The vice king of India, the last vice king was Lord Mountbatten, and there was a general. Anyway, another Mountbatten. So this is part of the royal family. But again, to be sure that it was not, so to speak, considered German, they removed the German elements of the family name, and therefore it became the House of Windsor. Windsor is a castle and a city in southern England. It was invented for a purpose. But if you go back to Jerusalem and David, the problem is, if you follow Finkelstein and no chronology there was no Jerusalem at the time of David, normal time as the
That's a problem. That's a major problem for David history.
Yeah, and they'll be fighting. They'll really be fighting archaeologists to save him there. A lot of archaeologists, Israeli archaeologists today will probably opt for to dismiss this low chronology. But I don't think Finkelstein has ever done it, really. He's been very careful, but he has not really done it. And Usitskin and some of the other guys there, when I talk to them, definitely not. Definitely not. But never mind. It's again, there was no city called Jerusalem. there was something in the modern period, because you have a guy from Jerusalem who's writing letters to Pharaoh. We are not found any city on the place in that time in the 14th century, in late Bronze Age. It's not there simply. It pops up in the Iron Age at a certain time, and it starts to grow seriously. It seems 800 BCE. Not before that. It's an empty place. It's an empty time in Jerusalem. And there's a reason for it, because there's not very much up there. But there must be something again, and there's been speculating about a holy tradition, which we ought to probably find as late as in the Elephantine text, when the temple there at Elephantine has been destroyed by the Egyptian people, purple, or whatever you call it, popular movement down there. They apply to Jerusalem, and the high priest there is not really the same way. It's Kuna, like Kahana, Gadal, in the Elephantine papyri, it's Aramaic. But they write to Jerusalem to get permission to rebuild the temple. So there must be something. But if you look at archaeology, I don't think you can find this temple in existence in Jerusalem at the time, but there must be something like a holy tradition attached to the place, which you, as you know, the Arabs call Al-Quds. Yeah, you have found it.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, you mentioned Finkelstein in the Forgotten Kingdom. This is what Finkelstein says in his concluding remarks. Assembling all the available data for scribal activity in Israel and Judah reveals no evidence of writing before 800 BC.
Yeah, that's correct.
So that means 800 BC, we're going into the 8th century BC, which is 700s.
Yeah.
David, hundreds of years after David, according to the biblical
8th century, that 8th century, 9th century line is when that's the possible writing. He's not even saying writing starts here. This is when we get the Bible. He's saying it's before that. There's no evidence at all for writing. So we have to start at 800 and then go between 800 and 150 BC is where we're at now.
So you have some scraps going back to, I think, around 1100 or between 1100 and 1000. I think 2 texts where they were not from Jerusalem, but from other places. It's not, but nothing that point at any kind of literary society. That could have been a few.
If I may,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
Now, that could, of course, be but this is it. If you go back to the Amana period, Melech, his letters are written in a kind. It's really pidgin Akkadian. It's awful if you know Akkadian. You just say, "Okay, I have flunked this person. It was an examination." Did
you call it pidgin Akkadian?
Yes, it is.
He's done that a lot already.
Pidgin Akkadian.
It's definitely written by a person who didn't have Akkadian as his first language, I can tell you. If you look at the grammar, it's a kind of Amorite or West Semitic disguised as if it was Akkadian. It's written in cuneiform. It's not, and it's quite funny, but there are a lot of things in Akkadian that's not there. It's much more West Semitic undertone you have there. You just find it when you know it. God. Here you have one, but as somebody has said, maybe it was Ivani also said, we don't know if there are more than one person who could write in Jerusalem, in this place at the time. It might be that the Egyptians in the province in Palestine simply placed scribes, badly educated people, at least that could write something around. So next to all those so-called kings in their own eyes, but the Egyptians are called mayors or officials or whatever you call it, so that has somebody to communicate, because they should be able to read the messages from Pharaoh, tell the local lords what Pharaoh wants from them. This makes sense, but it's nothing to do with literature.
Yeah.
But then we have an intriguing problem, as you also know when you read Finkelstein's book. And we can say we also have to back to this text, but let's take the David make this finish before we go back to Samaria. If you take David's, if you take David again, the inscription.
Mm-hmm. Till then, yeah.
When Biran found the inscription, they found, in two instances. first we have the big slab, and then we have 2 additional slabs.
Let me pull the image up while you do that.
We do that, yes.
Because I think I have a very clean version of it that I just used for the video I'm working on right now. Sorry. Okay, here we are. Well, I'll just share the screen, actually. That's what I'll do, is make it easier.
Yep.
Yeah, sure.
Because I could zoom in better. Okay. Here we are.
Yeah, keep it there. Keep it there. Okay. You can see the top line.
This
It's
one?
Yeah, here I'm coming. Here. If you look here, and you can follow the stroke, the line up there, going over the broken line and down the broken line. And that's something to be explained, isn't it?
So the question I have about this inscription, have there been serious scholars who have questioned the authenticity of this inscription altogether and thought this was a fabricated inscription?
Yeah.
Really?
I mean, I have done it, and Tom has done it, Tom Thompson has done it, and I mean, the people normally associate with what is called minimalism has doubted not from the first beginning, because when I saw the first time I saw the inscription, it was only that part, of course. I just said that okay, the house of David as name, the house is okay, but the house is not a man.
Right.
It doesn't prove the existence of a person called David.
That's been my point ever since I've learned about this.
Yes.
But what is that? You were showing me those top 3 letters. I can't even tell what that is. What is that supposed to be saying?
It says that the inscription is secondary in combination with the slab. Because you have, Mirkin wrote an article about it. He also made some photos about it, which was published in the Scandinavian Journal back, I think it was 2004, but Russell can tell you if you want to ask him.
Where is the word? Where is the word Dawood in here? I can't even see it. Like where?
Oh, it's not there.
Oh, on the bottom?
A little up. No, not at the bottom. But Derek, take it a little up so we can see the bottom of it.
This here?
Yeah. Where is the word Dawood? I want to see that.
You can still see some of the calcated, so you could eat it. Here's the David.
You talking about this here?
Yeah, that's a bet, David. Here.
That I see it now. Okay, so we clearly have a bet Dawood.
Yeah,
there.
No problem.
That's no problem. Yeah.
No, it's not.
Let me share this.
Except that's really one thing.
Yeah, go back. Okay, good.
Yeah.
But no, notice how they add the shin and the ion there. We don't even. How do we know those are shins and ions on the top?
That's one of my students, doctor students, who said once. That's the dynamic part of ancient inscriptions. That's the lacuna.
Oh, okay.
Here you put in all the things you want to be there.
Yeah, because I couldn't tell that was a shin or an ion. All I saw was that Dalit.
This is very good, isn't it? You don't see anything. You don't see.
Yeah, but now all of a sudden they're just kind of assuming that's what it says. It seems like.
Yeah. But the problem is this letter here, and you can also see here. Even you can see it's going on, but it's also going on here over here, eh? And here you can find reminiscence of it. I said you can find the examples in Mirkin's article in Scandinavian Journal for that time. If he must have the pictures. He published there. The technical level is not very good, so I'm not very happy about it. But it's okay. Here you have the argument about it being secondary. The problem is it's never really been investigated, the possibility. We discussed it back at Tel Israel when I did there back in 96. And the technician there, he said that it could be decided within 5 minutes if it's genuine or not genuine.
Really?
Yeah, stones sweat, but the sweat from the stone will be different in you cuts from the ancient Celts. So if it's an old inscription, you don't find any difference in how it reacts to some acids in the letters or outside the letters. But if it's different, then the inscription is different in time from the so.
And you're telling me we haven't done this test yet? No one's done this test yet? Why not?
Who is interested?
I am.
Yeah,
I want to know if it's real, because the reason why I'm questioning it.
You're not going to rate the Israel Museum.
But it doesn't fit. It almost doesn't make sense based on the other evidence we have. This should be questioned. I'm not saying it's not real. I wouldn't be surprised if it was. But it doesn't. It is out of place with all the other remaining evidence we have from this period. No, there's no other mentions of House of David anywhere besides the Bible, which means I think this should be questioned and tested and made sure that it's legit.
Of course, I know, but you have often, I sad to say, you have often seen that. Do you think, for instance, an Albright would have tested it?
You would have. You said you would have thought Albright would have tested it.
Oh. Do you think he would have?
Oh,
yeah.
But they didn't. You said, right? Nobody's done this to this.
I have never seen any indication that I've done it.
So this is, I like the fact that you start with granting, even though you probably don't think it's authentic, you're willing to play in the sandbox and say, hey, if this is authentic, we still need to explain House of David, and we can do so with an eponymous ancestor legend or myth. So you have a mythic kind of ancestor, the same way Heracles, we use the example. But if it isn't authentic, even more scandalous. And now a lot of people will go, well, you mythicists are only saying it's inauthentic because you are not mythicist, minimalist, because you don't want this to be an ancient attestation to a historical King David and a united or some kind of monarchy. Not maybe it wasn't a monarchy.
You know what I would say to that? I would say it doesn't matter what I want. It matters what the test results say.
Well, of course. I'm just saying.
You can have biases from all different angles. Believers, non-believers, doesn't matter what their motivations are. We still have to look at the arguments, got to look at the testing and the data. Doesn't matter.
In your book, if I may, what I love about this Tel Dan section, you highlight a lot of Israel is secular today. Modern Israel, there's a lot of secular, especially in the scholarship. However, while they're okay with you poking at Abraham and Jacob and Adam and Eve, it becomes, fighting gloves when you get to David, because David is an extremely significant figure for modern Israel, even if you're not religious.
The city of David is still a real city right now. Like it has an effect on today more than Abraham or Noah does.
Right.
So when at Israel, I gave a lecture for the kibbutzim, the people up there in the kibbutz where we're living. And I started, of course, my deconstruction, usual style. And they didn't care a damn thing about Abraham. And they didn't care a damn thing about Moses. Okay, that's fiction, that's everything. It's okay. When I came to David, you should see them react. Here you could simply say, that hurt. Because that's a self-understanding. Now, understand them some member of a state that's more or less founded by David. And you also see it when Israel being there since the time of David for south before Christ and so on. But we don't have any Israel in Palestine between 722, when the Assyrians conquered Samaria, and 1948 AD, when Ben Gurion declared the state to be an independent state. We don't have any historical Israel there between those two dates.
Not even the Maccabean period?
Nothing.
No, because that's Jerusalem. Israel being north, specifically the idea of the united monarchy.
Yeah, I hope.
I get what you're saying now. That united monarchy thing. Okay.
Yeah, but you can get on. We can get back to that a little later. But that's really a very important point we are at here. Altså, qui bono, as they say in Latin. Who profits from this?
Right.
That's really why do we have this story about this collective right? It was never there.
It's a good question. I believe that. I mean, I think you're, man.
I want to save some juicy stuff for future interviews because I know we can get into the weeds. And Neil, you and me are like two chiefs here, bro. We've got a million questions, I'm sure. I think there's a big question. Before we get to super chats, I really want to allow you to ask another one too, Neil, before we end up trying to sum up things. And we appreciate your time, Dr. Lemche. We want you back. We want to go deeper in the weeds. But my final question, and then I want to allow Neil his, and then we'll get to super chats. So send your super chats. If you have a question, say it now or forever hold your peace. Just kidding. Till maybe the next show. And my final question is, okay, the Bible is constructed early third, sometime in the 3rd century, whenever, sometime in the 3rd century, early to late. It's being worked on. Let's just pretend Alexandrian Library. Oh, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think when you say the Bible is too much.
Okay.
The text connected in the Bible,
yep,
were properly established as text in that period.
Got it.
The Bible as such is, the Old Testament is not really older than the New Testament, because you need to have the idea of a book before you have a Bible. It's
right.
You have also mean, but you don't have, so to speak, everything within 2 volume. So of course, a book, nobody can say anything. The book is of course Hellenistic Roman. It's not something bad. Some of the text might be much older. It's not that, but the book as such is really definitely Hellenistic. It cannot be discussed really.
That's what I've been saying. Like even if there's source material that goes back to 700 BC, the book we have, the form that we have it in, is Hellenistic.
That's why I was going to say this is kind of why I wanted to save some stuff for a future episode with you, because we will go on and on and on for a while about this, about prophets. It's just taken for granted that Isaiah wrote the first Isaiah, not the 2nd and 3rd. We know that guy didn't write that. But
yeah, Derek watched me in a group chat with another scholar get scolded for doubting. We know Isaiah was a real prophet. Are you crazy? And I'm just thinking to myself, am I in the Twilight Zone right now for questioning Isaiah? Really? We know. This is what I was told. We know Isaiah was a prophet during the 8th century or 7th century or something. I'm like, what? What do you mean we know that? I just thought that was funny how that happened to me.
Just a short remark. We can come back to that another time. When you read Isaiah and start from the first chapter, the poetry there is enormous. It's fantastic poetry.
Yeah.
And when you get into later parts of the book, you say it deteriorates, but it's extremely high level, literary level. And that point, at least if it's not one person, a couple of persons with a very high literary standards who has composed most of the book as such. But you can't say, for instance, that first Isaiah is earlier than second Isaiah. Maybe what we call third Isaiah, which is such a thing. But all this is nonsense, really. This is not discussion. It's much less like a JE discussion in the Pentateuch. But you can't. I can only say yes. You can, if you try to identify who wrote it, you say this is really a poet of the first order. It's not something that's just coming like this, from God. It's really very fine poetry. But that is what you find in the Hebrew Bible. I mean, I'm not so sure about Taliban, but because people are religious doesn't mean they can't write great poetry.
Right.
I'm not sure. That we have to accept. We can always discuss what is written there, but if you take from the formalistic and from also the context and see how it developed into and been used also in our modern, more modern tradition. If you think of how Isaiah been used, for instance, in Handel's The Messiah, you can see how important those texts are really, not because it happened, but again because it's great poetry.
Of course,
it's a great story to tell.
Yeah, I agree, and I guess I'd like to do one where we talk about prophets. We explain why we would doubt prophets' existence, because it's just Josiah did this, Ezra and Nehemiah did this. Ezekiel said these things. He wrote these things. When the story is taking place is when they actually wrote these things. And so I'd like to get into that at some point in the future.
There's clearly a theme going on in the prophets. There's this struggle and tug of war between kings that are doing the right thing and worshiping Yahweh alone, and kings that aren't, and putting up Asherah poles. And then the prophet's job is to scold the kings that are bad and tell them in the future you're going to lose everything, and God's going to come and strike all you down. There's a clear theme. This is not, you don't get this in regular poetry in every other places. There's a theme going on in the prophets. They're united. There's a thread. There's a common thread in those prophets.
Yeah. But you can also see, I would put it that way, that prophets and what you call the traditionalist history, at least, from Deuteronomy to 2 Kings, they're two sides of the same coin. On one side, the prophetic side, is predicted that it will end in catastrophe. And how can you know that this happened? Yes, you have the kings. You have the story in Kings.
Yeah, it's circular.
So you go like this.
Exactly. Oh, that's what's happening. We've been doing this. Oh, it's so frustrating to have to deal with. Well, hold on. Hosea says,
yes, exactly,
the name Moses. Therefore, Moses is back here in the time of Hosea, because Hosea's dated. How do you know Hosea's dated that? And so it just becomes a vicious cycle. So my question, and I want to dive into that in depth with you in the future, or have Neal. Either way, me and Neal need to get you on. My final question in all of this is, if we grant the minimalist school of thought that these texts are compiled, most are probably crafted around this time of the Hellenistic period, why did they write this in your estimation? Because your whole goal was, we want to understand the material. Why did they write this material? Do you think they were competing nationalistically with other peoples and crafting their own mythic history of the past? What would you say is the reason they wrote these texts?
I think that this text was written in order to propose that Palestine has always been united into that's really the reason. And who will benefit from that? There will be the Maccabees, there will be Hasmoneans.
Yeah,
it's really a political program to show that we are one and the same. If we had time, I would also have gone to the Israelites from Delos in Greece, which are the only Israelites ever we have met who use the name Israel above themselves. That's from around the second century BCE. Two inscriptions from Delos. People call them Israelita in Greek. They're writing Greek. They are from Crete, Heraklion, among other things. And their allegiance is to the temple at Gerizim. They're not referring to Jerusalem, they're referring to Samaria and Gerizim, in Shechem. That's really what they are. And therefore I think the name of Israel is probably attached to this place, to the northern place. Shechem, Gerizim, maybe all the way up to Samaria. It's not many kilometers after all. But who are there don't seem to be any love between Samaria and Jerusalem, really. There never was, as a matter of fact. It's a funny thing. Even today, the people in Samaria and the people in Nablus don't really like the people in Hebron. And we can see from the history before the Israeli conquest in 67, the people from Hebron communicated with people in Amman rather than with people in Nablus. So it was never, because it's for the martyr letters. We have Labaio, who take away our cities, as the other right, complain to Pharaoh. And we have this Abdiheba. And in one letter, the king of Gezer writes, now Labaio is dead. But Abdiheba, he said, now taking away our cities, is coming another Labaio. Jerusalem, Nablus, Nablus. It's a kind, it's not as, it's a divided country, and always been that like. They don't like each other in those parts. It's an old tradition there. So we should not be surprised when we see all those Palestinian fractions today. They've always been there. It's not, so, but again, who will be interested? I think the Hasmonean will be interested. But then we are talking about identity theft. They're taking over the tradition belonging to the North and convert it into their own tradition.
So the Samaritan, is it probably safe to say that maybe they're hijacking the Samaritanism of the ancient world? And you see this battle even happening in the New Testament over and over. The Samaritans and the Jews, and like, what the heck? So you're saying that has been, you think that's part of the Hasmonean dynasty of like we are the inheritors, we are the ancient Israelites, we go back, and this is our story.
Yeah, and Hyrcan is destroying the sanctuary of Gerizim. He's simply destroying the Samaritan sanctuary, central one. Definitely, because he don't want his people to go to Samaria, of course. He wants the center to be his own town, Jerusalem, and his own temple there. It's power politics, really, we are talking about. So I think if you're looking for it, it's a simplified version here. It's much more intricate, I think. But we also have to, we can also have an alternative, say, where do we find a situation where Samaritans will be closer to people from Judah and Jerusalem and southern Palestine than to anybody else? That would be exactly in Alexandria. And then we have two groups speaking more or less the same language. Traditions are not too far away from each other, and sitting down and making a common story. That's really one of the other options that are there. I personally prefer probably the Hasmonean idea, and the idea that we have a lot of Hasmonean propaganda, for instance, already in Jewish history, that I find very sensible, very good. One of my old friends and teachers, John Strange, wrote an article in a Festskrift in 1993 about the book of Joshua as Hasmonean propaganda tool. Because the borders there, he said, exactly the borders that Hasmonean are going after.
So yeah, I love entertaining that. Neil, what's your question, man? And
I've already asked them. I think we can go to super chats. That was
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so Niels, this is your first video we've done, so people can ask a question. They throw us a few shekels, and we can keep the lights on, doing what we do. And so we appreciate all of our people who help support us, throw out questions. They send a little money, and we'll ask the guest scholar a question from them. You'll answer, and then we'll move on to the next one. And then when we run out, we'll go ahead and wrap things up and do this again another time if you're available.
Yeah, that's fine. That's
okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Lyricus, thank you so much for the super chat. Is it true that Mount Moriah, where Isaac was almost sacrificed, is where the second temple was built in Jerusalem?
I would say, from the internal logic of the story will not make very much sense if it was not the case. But again, we leave the history here and keep the narrative. And when you have a temple like the one in Jerusalem, it will be like a magnet to traditions like that.
Thank you. Yeah, I could see why someone might look at this at just my comment. Isaac is in a sense prefiguring Jesus dying in Jerusalem in a story. So they want maybe Golgotha is Mount Moriah in a sense. Just kind of, I could see that happen. Okay.
But yeah, because if you take, for instance, Abraham's story, just to tell, we only know what the authors wanted to tell us.
Right.
But sometimes you get a glimpse of something else. For instance, the story about, we have this strange text in the beginning of Genesis 16 about Abraham warning about who's going to take over after him, who's going to, and then they have this Ebenezer from Damascus. What had Abraham with Damascus to do? But the church father has a story where what kind of story, how it has it. It doesn't make any sense really, and it does it because he has a story that Abram came with his army to conquer Damascus. It's not in the Bible.
Yeah.
But you have it outside the Bible. Who says that Moses died on Mount Nebo? This is also a joke story. When you're on Mount Nebo, I don't know if you've been there. I've been there several times. You can never see anything because it's so dizzy down. You go down into the valley and you can't really see anything on the other side from Mount Nebo. So therefore I said once to my students when we were there, here you see, the story says that Moses, he died there. No, it did not. There have been blowing up small chapels all over the area to find his grave. No. He was so depressed because he couldn't see anything. So he went down to the nearest pub and then sat for the rest of his life and drank. So they had to blow up the pubs around.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. Doc Floromanot, thank you for the 20. I appreciate that, and for being a member. Minimalism raises vital points, but sometimes downplays evidence like Hazar's destruction or early inscriptions. How can we balance skepticism with a fair assessment of archaeological and textual data in Israelite origins? Thank you for that.
Skepticism is a problem, and the attitude is wrong. You are not skeptic, because when you're skeptic, you say something cannot be true. You are critical. It's a different word, and it's what we are talking about. Because if you're critical, you can, of course, make a fair assessment of archaeological and textual data. It's not a problem, really. It's only that you're critical. As I said before, you can only be 100% critical. It means you're discussing everything. But if you can't start as being a skeptic, you already made a decision that it's not necessarily a fair evaluation of the archaeological material you're presenting. You see, skeptical is a negative word here. Critical is a positive word, and here you should go for the positive word and not the negative word, because it's not about proving that the Bible is not true.
Right.
As I said, one of my reasons being a theologian, I said about the Bible, the idea that the Bible should be a lie. If it's not historically true, it's a lie. No, it's not. It's nonsense. Right. It's not what it's about. I can't really say as a theologian the Bible is lying to you. It's not, because it's not pretending that what you think they're pretending. It's telling you a story, and you can take a story and you can follow a story and can learn from a story. It can impress you or whatever. But to use something that happened thousands of years ago to decide what you are going to do today, is nonsense. Really, it's simply so incredible stupid that I mean. That's how it must be. Yeah.
I have an issue with the first sentence here. Hazor's destruction or early inscriptions. What early inscriptions, first of all? Because the early inscriptions don't mention Moses or Noah or Abraham or the Torah or anything. And then especially when you look at the city of Elephantine that was there for over 150 years, none of them have any knowledge of this. So I'm like, what early inscriptions are you talking about? The early inscriptions only attest to a kingdom of Israel, kings like Hezekiah, stuff like that. Those aren't the things that minimalists.
I wouldn't even call it a kingdom of Israel. Actually, it just calls it Israel. It might be a tribe.
But those aren't the things that minimalism is questioning. Also, Hazor's destruction. Wait, a place got destroyed in the Bronze Age, so the Bible is correct? I don't understand what he means by that. So I just want to say, like, yeah, things happen in history. The Bible can get certain things right. It could be writing about things that actually happen in history, but that doesn't make this text older. It means people wrote about it at some point. We're trying to find out when it was written about.
This is an interesting point, because Robert Cargill, in his book called Cities That Built the Bible, he kind of makes this point that when they crafted the myths, they're looking at the geographic locations. That could have happened any time. There could have been people in the Hellenistic period who had traveled or had awareness, or they had archives that showed, hey, this area, there's a lot of salt and pillars of salt. Well, we're going to write a story where the guy's wife turns into a pillar of salt. So the geography, which means you might come across a ruins of a massive built structure that's been destroyed, and say, you know, this is where our ancient ancestors fought. You can say that based on looking at a building that's already fallen apart. But I guess
exactly.
I know that a lot of evangelicals will use Hazor's destruction and try to line it up with Finkelstein's archaeology and other people to say, haha, we have one among the 20, 30 places that Joshua says they went and conquered, and
all it tells us that someone later in some point wrote about this destruction. Doesn't mean that they were at the place writing it down at the place.
Right.
We have to find out when they wrote about it. Even someone pointed to me the inscription that mentioned Balaam. Wow, cool. So Balaam is written about by some people, and Balaam was written about by someone else in another place. How do we know they're at the same exact time? We don't.
We don't.
Those are the things that we're questioning.
That's what makes people, what Niels has been saying, and in his book, is they'll find stuff that's old, like he said about Gilgamesh, and they'll go, Gilgamesh is old. The Bible clearly is inspired by Gilgamesh in certain places. Therefore, the Bible is close to the oldness of Gilgamesh. And it's like, where did this logic come in? So
Shakespeare wrote about Julius Caesar. Did Shakespeare live in the 1st century BC? He wrote about him in the 1600s. It's the same exact. It's just same exact logic. You're going to date Shakespeare to the 45 BC now because he mentioned the death of Shakespeare or Caesar.
Right?
Hell no, you wouldn't do that.
But Doc does follow up just to make clarity here, Niels, if you don't mind. There was a major destruction layer around the 13th century BCE.
What does that have to do with the Bible? They wrote about it.
What are your comments about that? Just to get your thoughts.
So, Hazor?
Yes, Hazor.
And so we know about the city from the Amarna letters. It's not the city as such is not a problem. He was there. He also, at a certain point, was destroyed. We don't know. Of course, you can all discuss the reasons. And the rebuilding was minimal compared to the Bronze Age city. The Bronze Age city was more Assyrian city than a Palestinian city. It's huge, really. It's like a tale you find in Syria, which go there. With that, you can probably soon go to Syria. I hope you noted that development that's going on there. I've been there several times, of course, but it's a lovely, a wonderful place, simply. So if you get a chance, go to Syria and see some of the tales there, get another impression of a much bigger society than the one you find in Palestine, which also a reminder to something. But Hazor says, no. Such a tradition, this is something about, when you talk about such a tradition, as Hazor, you have a huge tale. You can see only a little part of it has been rebuilt, and then you start to fabulate about how it happened. But you are assuming that people who say about 200 years later or 300 years later would know what happened really. That was probably not the case, except if it was put down into writing in the early stage. The thing I wrote in one of the books edited by Emmanuel Faux on sociology, I wrote about sociology and memory, and took an example from central Turkey, a place called Iflatun Pinari. It's close to Besa here, about 100 kilometers from Konya in central Anatolia. Iflatun Pinari betyder the well of Plato. Plato. He has never been there, never. And the monument itself is a Hittite monument from around 1400 BCE. It's a border monument between Hatti and Arsava. But the locals have made up a story about this is this big sorcerer, Plato. That's his will. Maybe next time I should send you a photo so you can put it up there so you can see what we talk about here, because it's such a splendid place, a wonderful place to be. But people make up things. You can see you have a city here, something must have happened here. Then we make a story about what happened there. You see, that's how it is. People don't know if you don't have it written down, so to see within the same generation that did it.
Right.
It's the same with Homer and Troy. As the discussion about Troy is so similar to our tradition. I've been for more than 100 years since Schliemann, at least since Schliemann. Did Troy ever happen? You brought in Atlantis before. I'm quite sure that if I meet Plato up there or down there, whatever, I will I'm knocking on his nose for the story. This stupid story people are discussing for I don't know how many times. This is a true story.
You fried people's brains, Plato. What did you do?
Yeah, that's just nonsense to me. Yeah, but I said, you see, but that's part of the modern mind. It's part of a human mind, really, that they can't really. They have problems understanding on more than one level. So a story that I saw, yes, of course, you have this huge tale, the biggest one, except from that's another one, which we have no stories about Tel Gison in the western part of Galilee. There's nothing about it. There seems also a definition by, if you look at the remnants, this can be discussed, of course, but there are no stories about that tale, as far as I know. Nobody asked the adult population if they had somebody. There's no one interested. But again, somebody wrote a story about Hazor, and there might be something in it. Something might have happened, yes. But to include some Israelites, Joshua, other people around there, no, it doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense.
Thank you. Daniel Kyle, thank you again for the super chat and for being a member of MythVision. Are the prophets historical? What about the rituals, the holy oil, Yom Kippur? I want to dive deeper into this, but maybe you give a shorter answer to this question. I don't know time-wise, because I know we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more after this.
I would say the rituals that you mean the Jewish the later Jewish rituals, or what we have in, for instance, in the Torah. Probably the Torah here will be the best point, and here where I recite and use the same technique as Adler. It was an Adler. When you don't have anything, it means that you don't have anything. If you have no sign of anything being followed, as if you don't see the rules of the Torah being followed, for instance, in the 4th century, then I know Torah. Or rather, if there should be a Torah, nobody paid attention to it. You see, it was not known. It was not accepted. It was just a piece of writing. So we don't really know how old and where they belong. We don't know really. Holy oil is the same with the next what you always have Yom Kippur or so. I mean, it's the same we have here. We don't know really. It could be, but again, you can't here come back behind. You can't come behind the Torah as such. You can't get back to appeal before Torah, where you can imagine such things to have taken place, because you can't say whether it's taking place or not taking place. It's simply a moot question. Prophecy historical, I think we will leave that to another occasion, because it's much more. Then we don't have time for the next 5 questions, I think. But it's also a question of this kind. They can be historical without very much historical elements in the prophecies, in the books.
They're working off sources too, so there's some really cool stuff. We could probably cover all that.
I also think, real quick, the issue I have with the idea that the prophets existed and their text just wasn't well known to the average person. Like the average person didn't know about it. That's why we don't find them in Elephantine or any inscriptions or anything. The problem with that is, why would people be writing prophecy to nobody, to one person? Like, if there's no audience, then why are they writing? It just doesn't make sense to me.
And yeah, and here you come to something that's quite new. Also, some ideas. Some people have also that belongs to that idea. We should look at communication. How do you communicate your ideas to a greater population? I mean, they could not write. They could not read at all. Paper, whatever they had, was extremely expensive. It was not for ordinary people. How can you reach a forum where you could, so to speak, broaden your ideas? Like, for instance, here today, a number of people will be here and listen to this, but how can you do that? And when we move to the Hellenistic period, it's an easy answer. The theater. You can't find a Greek city or a Greek Hellenistic city without at least one theater.
Right.
And the theater's size is dependent on the size of the city where you find it. But they're always so big that it can include most of the population of the settlement where they're found. You have it everywhere. It's simply, yes, here you have a place where the author can go up and can present his story. Mm-hmm. And there'll be thousands of people sitting there listening to it. They can't control anything because they can't read. And they're not interested really whether it happened or not happened. It's not the point for them. For them, it's the point, is this a good story?
Yeah.
Yeah. Kind of like the Bard. Yeah, this is really, really good. Okay, I want to do this more with you. Daniel, Kyle, thank you for gifting 5 MythVision memberships to people in the chat. That's awesome. You're giving out 5 angels' wings and salvation to people. I mean, come on. You know, this is where it's at. Tracy Finstar, thank you for the super chat. Are there parallels between the Argonautica and the Old Testament? I almost brought this up when you guys kept bringing up Ephagenia, because you and I both know, and I'm sure you've read or heard of Philip Wagenbaum's book, Argonauts of the Desert. And there's also been some writings that have shown that the Argonautica, there is this, you were talking about the Naxos, I think it's called in Greek Naxos myth, where they're trying to get home, but they can't get home. It's
no story. No story.
Nostor. No store. Yeah, Nostor? Nostos.
Nostoi.
Nostoi. Okay. Okay. So this myth of going home, but in this Argonautica, there's a promised land, just like Abraham. And 4 generations later, just like Abraham, they received that land. And so there's this story where the king Artemiss, his new wife, I know, who's not happy with the kids, says, oh, the temple of Apollo, Apollo says, thou shalt kill thy children, because they're trying to get out of this drought. And so Artemiss goes to sacrifice Phrixus and Helle, and then the golden fleeced ram saves them. Helle falls off in the water where Hellespont, the region of Hellespont, and he makes it to the land and sacrifices the ram and hangs the golden fleece in the tree. Anyway, that sounds like Abraham as well. What other parallels? Do you know any other?
Again, here we have a parallel because that story we have in a Hellenistic version, Apollodorus.
Right.
But again, you can also see how Euripides is playing with it in Medea. Jason and Medea. Medea is a princess he brings back from this campaign on his ship. And the whole drama Euripides is placed on her reactions to his unfaithfulness. And she is described as a non-Greek woman who really would not tolerate what's happening and kill her children. It's a terrible story, of course. Euripides can be very, very difficult really to accept. But again, you can see, as I said before, you can trace the story which Apollodorus uses in his epos about it, long time before he lived. So he's taken from stuff that's already there. And then it's transferred into this epos. And that's, of course, the epos we know of most of today because it's a text. But you have it again in the same means as before. Also paintings, mosaics, whatever you look for in art.
Thank you. Baltimore football history. Thank you for the super chat. If by 250 BCE we have Jewish scrolls, how many hundreds of years would it take for the religion per se to get to the point of those writings? 500 years.
No. First of all, we don't have very much from 250 BCE. Even if they try to take the Dead Sea Scrolls further back, I think we have troubles whenever you try to get back before, say, 150. That's first thing. We are down in Hasmonean period really here. And if you say how many hundreds of years would it take to really proceed to get to the point of those writings, 500 years perhaps? No. As I said before, it could happen within a year if you wanted to. If you have a dedicated selection of learned people who can write, sitting there and enjoying life, I say, writing those funny texts, interesting texts, it doesn't need to take very long time. But what you're confusing here, the question is confusing the time of producing the text from the time covered by the traditions included in those texts. It's two different things, really.
We used to think the same problem, Niels, with the idea that legend, it's too early for legend to develop. You can have a legend build within 24 hours. It doesn't take years for legend to become a thing. And we have evidence of that. Lucian was talking about the passing of Peregrinus, and he explains how this Peregrinus Proteus guy, who's claiming to be like this new Heracles in the Stoic movement, is going to jump onto the fire. And immediately after he is dead, there's a story that like a falcon or a phoenix rises out of his fire like the next day. It was like the next day. And so legend, it sounds to me the same way. It's a little different because you're writing, but it doesn't take long before you can write legend or myth.
You can always take Hans Christian Andersen, the feather that became 5 fat hen within a day. You know this little story he has there. That's up. Is a hen is telling a story about a feather. Therefore, somebody had done that another hen, cleaned off a feather, and within 24 hours, this feather become 5 fat hen. This has so it's exactly what he's saying there. Yes, it does take in time. If you have a story, have the right media or whatever, you can distribute it within few hours, as a matter of fact.
Exactly. Thank you, the motherfucking Wendyberg, for being amazing. Super chats, being a member of MythVision. We appreciate you here. I'm just happy to be here, she says.
Oh, that's nice.
Thank you so much. 2 more here. Mr. Warlight, thank you for the super chat. Didn't Judea have early Yahwism, possibly in the 10th century BCE when the kingdom started, given its Yahweh etymology and its early kings like Abijah?
So we have no problems with the name of Yahweh at all, except if you're Jews and don't want to be stoned.
Minimalism doesn't contest that Yahwism existed or doesn't exist. That's no problem there. Yahwism is there. It goes back to the Bronze Age. So yeah,
of course, and we have that evidence also in writing. It's not a problem really, but 10th century could be a problem because we don't really know what was in Judea in the 10th century, not very much at least, and we don't have any inscription to tell us what it was there. Even the inscription is from the north; it's not from the Judea. So after all, when the kingdom started, that's also assertion. We don't know when it started there, but this is only the biblical evidence that it started there, and modern scholars who had invented that date. I don't know really what, but it's so nice to say that David ascended to his throne in 1000. Why not 1002 or 3, but 1000? That's a date you normally see in.
That's exactly when David shows up in the Bible in the kingdom. So it's like, just happens to be right there. Is that why you put it there? Probably.
So sorry, Yahweh's etymology. Yeah, what is that? You don't know it. You simply don't know what it is really. It looks like, as you say, as you have there in Exodus chapter 3, I'm the one who is. But really, we have this Sinai inscriptions with a name there, and it seems to have a history which go beyond Hebrew, and we have really no idea of the origin of it.
Right.
Kings like Abia, yes, my father is Yah. It's okay, yes, but what do we know about Abia? There are a lot of other kings with that name, also with Yah names, and you also see in the north, or more in the form of Yah. Then it's a form of Yahoo and Yah. Yeah. So it's around there. There's no problem. We should not make Yahweh a problem.
Right.
What is a problem is, should we say, the Jewish deity, which we're not allowed to pronounce. But when we see Yahweh, it's not really a problem because it's not written anywhere. So we don't just have to say it's not God's name. But the first, we know the first part of the name is Yah. There's no doubt about it. All the names where it appears seems to have Yah at the beginning. That's the first syllable. The second syllable we don't know. Yahweh, we don't know with that. We have Yehu and Yahweh and so on. So we have names, of course, shorter names forms. Yes, Yahoo, you had again Yahoo. So it's again, yeah. It's quite common, but you have to go in and see. It's not the appearance of the Yahweh name that is interesting, really. There's appearance of names that are not Yahwistic. That's interesting. Like, for instance, Samaria Osaka.
Like who?
The Samaria Osaka.
Okay, yeah.
If you take those texts, you find a number of other gods. That's interesting to say because it points to a different level. And of course, as we discussed before, it's also interesting with those inscriptions that talk about Yahweh and Asherah. Yep. Because it means that the God is there, but it seems to have changed character over time, which is quite normal, isn't it?
Yep.
Even the God of the Old Testament has to be educated. It's one of the jokes about the primary history. That's about a God who is quite new. He makes a number of mistakes. And he learned from them. We can see that. He learned from them. I mean, it's clearly, but that God, he's not really in charge at the beginning of the story. He has created this world, but what to do about it, really? It's a fine program, but he doesn't really know what to do. So he's learning it's the hard way he's learning it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, last one. This is a good question. Dr. Aaron Adair is actually co-authoring a book right now on Moses. And he asks, archaeology, thank you for the super chat, by the way. Archaeology demonstrates there was no mass fleeing out of Egypt, but there is the story. What is your best guess for the origins of the Exodus tradition, Dr. Lemche?
In some way, it's been contested with some way, I think it's the myth of the Hyksos. As an Egyptian myth of his story about the Hyksos. Those who, according to Egyptian tradition, were invaders from Asia who came to Egypt at the end of the Middle Kingdom and established a kingdom of their own in northern Egypt. And Pharaoh, Amos, I think it was name, he started to throw them out of Egypt. It could be fun if Amos was Moses, that Moses in Egyptian tradition was originally the one who got rid of the Hyksos. And in the Bible, he becomes the person who taken them out of Egypt. It's not quite the same, but I think that's the most promising thing, but that's not original for me. I think Josephus already mentioned it.
Josephus thinks that too, yeah.
Yeah. And
by the way, there was another variation of the Exodus story where it's just a band of Egyptian Israelites, I guess you would call them. It's mentioned by Tacitus, and there's another Plutarch. That's right. They talk about this. I don't know. I think the source is from Hecataeus, one of the fragments. I'm not really sure though. But the point is, there was a Hellenistic variation of the Exodus where a band of Israelites led by Moses were kicked out of Egypt during the reign of King Bocchus, which puts us in the 700s BC, not in the Bronze Age. They mention the pharaoh's name, King Bocchus, and they say that the god Amun was gave the people an oracle that the Jews had to be kicked out because they were giving pestilence and disease and all this stuff. And so they got kicked out of Egypt, and then they're in the desert, and they said a pack of wild donkeys led them to water on the 7th day. So that's why to this day they worship the image of the donkey. So it's a very weird, strange variation. I don't know where they got it from. It's not in the Bible, obviously, and it doesn't even seem to be part of the pseudepigrapha tradition. So that thing I don't even know how it got to Tacitus by that point. But
no, but that is in same line with the story I had about Abraham conquering Damascus. That's something we don't have in the Bible, but we can see that has been, or probably has developed, a number of stories that didn't make it to become official text, but still were around. When you drive down to Jericho from Jerusalem, you pass the grave of Moses. How can that be? Of course, it's maybe a Muslim tradition and a quite young tradition. I don't know. I've not studied it, but still, it's just classic. You just see it there, and you say, "Oh, Moses' grave." I think it was the other side, but I mean, you have a number of that kind of traditions or indications, both in the Bible and without the Bible. You have, for instance, in Judges, Book of Judges, again to return to that here at the end. It's not very good as editing of Judges is bad, just bad. There are a lot of contradictions and things, references to things that are not happening, whatever. In the Gideon story, the reference to something that's not described there. It was like that, but I know that they're like that because the story is not included. So, in some way, the person who wrote that must know that that his readership will know more about this than he will tell you here. Mm-hmm. of course, it is from an editorial point of view a catastrophe, very bad editing. But it's an illusion to think that we know everything. They told us something, but there are a lot of things they didn't tell us. And therefore, we also have to look at the selection and say, why did it tell it in this way? Again, what's the purpose of this story? But also, what is the purpose of things left out?
Right. Good point. Well said.
There's so much going on in the Hellenistic period with Moses, and I was just re-listening to The Evil Creator by M. David Litwa, and he goes over some of these weird things that Neil's bringing up, and I feel like he got something backwards in the book. It sounded like he acted like the biblical Exodus is earlier, just using the standard Hebrew Bible scholarship kind of view. The Exodus story is earlier, and then there's these stories about leprosy, that they're lepers, they're diseased. And what's odd is, why would the Bible have a passage where Moses is told by God, all right, put it in there. All right, pull it out. Oh, it's leper. Oh, put it in. Oh, it's not leper now. Why are you adding that in there? This sounds more like, let me add this because there's a tradition that we are all a bunch of diseased people, but God can heal people, even lepers. So I don't think that Litwas looked into that when he wrote this book, but it's fascinating.
Yeah. I don't think we know either way which one was earlier. They both seem to be they both might be Hellenistic. Who knows?
But in Gilgamesh, you have another example. In the story of flood in Gilgamesh, if you look at what you could call references, intertextual references, the first bird sent out by Noah is a raven. It doesn't find anything where it can land, so it's flying around for 40 days. As Norman said to students, have you ever seen a raven flying for 40 days? Those lazy birds, they don't really care to move when you come driving on the road, What did they do as a raven? And what is doing there? Because then they sent the pigeon out 3 times. But what's going on here? When you read Gilgamesh, you'll see that the raven is the third bird who's sent out who find the earth dry. But the raven is an unclean bird, so it's not allowed to find the earth, and the new earth, I mean. Whereas the pigeon, which we know is not really clean, but again, it's hallowed as a clean bird, so it's a clean and you can sacrifice or whatever, so it must be something like that. But the raven is there in Genesis. So in this way, the author in Genesis say, you can see where I have a text. I am rewriting Gilgamesh here. So this raven there is kept simply as an indication. Here you can see where I have my sources for the story.
Wow.
It doesn't make any sense otherwise. It's totally superfluous. This doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
Last one, GD5. Thank you for the super chat. Could the Pelasgians be the remnants of the wealthy Hyksos post-defeat in Egypt? Diodorus of Sicily.
No. Pelasgians are native inhabitants. Specifically, it seems like they lived in Thessaly, according to the Greek sources, according to Herodotus. A lot of people don't even think they existed. I think they probably were. I don't know. I think you can use the term as pre-Hellenistic native inhabitants of the Greek mainland, so Thessaly area.
I say
nothing to do with Egypt at all, or Hyksos, or Semitic, or Semites.
Herodotus has a story about the Pelasgians. It's about somebody is trying to find out which is the oldest language, the original language. So get 2 children, newborn children, isolate them, see how they develop together, and what language they speak together. They all sort of believe they would be Greek, of course, but it was Pelasgian. Yeah. That's the kind of story we have about the Pelasgians. Sicily is a wonderful place to be, but I don't think Pelasgians have ever anything to do with Sicily.
Yeah, no, it's never meant. The only place that are listed in Homer in the Iliad, there's a tribe of Pelasgians living on Crete. Other than that, they're mostly on the mainland of Greece, and they're always listed as pre-Greek. So they're like the natives of Greek.
Yeah.
Okay, gentlemen, we are wrapping up here. I'm going to do a quick little shameless plug. If you're watching, we had close to 1,000 people live. This is the book, Back to Reason. I pinned the book at the top. I should have brought this up earlier, but we were having so much fun. Minimalism and Biblical Studies. If you want a history behind what led these scholars to come to the conclusions of being more doubtful about the traditions, definitely check this book out. It's not a big read. I'm literally 20 minutes or 20 pages away from the very end. And it's been a fascinating ride. Lots of big names are brought up in this book. The history behind how this all started. It goes way, way back. Get you a copy pinned at the top of the chat right now for viewers. Be sure to subscribe to my boy Gnostic Informant if you haven't already. He's doing all sorts of big stuff. Really, really interesting material. We're like brother, sister channels, and we hit things at completely different angles, complement each other a lot too. Holy freaking smokes. Are you kidding me? Someone just gave 50 gifted.
Oh, wow. Mother freaking Wendy Berg.
Wow.
50 membership. That's awesome.
Well, we have 50 more members to the New Jerusalem. Hallelujah.
Wow.
Seriously.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much for this, Wendy. I really, really appreciate the gift. A lot of people now are members. Hope they maintain that membership. They got to keep their salvation. You got to work it out. But seriously, subscribe to him. Get the book. And any final words from our guest, Dr. Lemche, please, any advice, tips, wisdom from you?
Yeah, I will still say as before that the theological problem is that if the maximalist pushes on, then we have, as historians, to say this is nonsense. And therefore, the Bible is a big lie. As a theologian, this is not acceptable. And it's not necessary. It's not a necessary conclusion. Because the problem is found in our own way of looking about literature. It's a modern mania. Something should be historical. For the ancients, it was not really important. Of course, they liked it, but for instance, Herodotus, they considered to be, well, presenting good and valid, fine narratives. His colleague from the 2nd century, the admiral, was much more concise. They knew that. They couldn't make distinctions, of course, between them. But again, read the Bible as a piece of literature and say, my salvation, if you use that point, if you use that kind of wording, my salvation is not depending on something that happened 3,000 years ago. Whether David went that way around the hill or that way around the hill is really immaterial. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. We got to do this again. I'd like to do a pre-recorded with you in the future where you are speaking your regular tongue, and then I will use my AI, have it translated, and make it easier, because I know a lot of people had a struggle. I struggled. Some of it's difficult to understand or hear, and I just wanted to repeat. But you have a lot of insight in your books. If you really want the best way to really get his information and not have that struggle, it's in the books. There's no struggle. You don't have any issues, and there's a lot to be said. So thank you, Neal, for joining me, and Dr. Niels Peter Lemche. This is the first YouTube interview that I've seen you ever do. Let's have more if you're available.
Yeah, I'm available. Yes.
Neal, you're muted.
Yeah.
Sounds good. I'll definitely be reaching out as well.
Let's do it. Ladies and gentlemen, never forget, we are MythVision.
Son, do you want to know what the truth is? After this, there's no turning back. You take the blue pill and you wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to. You take the red pill and you stay in Wonderland, and I show you just how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.